Let's build our own custom audit compliance reports with Tanium Comply. Welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone. And recently, a Tanium customer asked me how to build their own internal audit compliance reports. They wanted some of their own custom checks to find things that are unique to their environment. They wanted to tweak some of the scores and values for the CIS 18 benchmarks. And then they wanted to map all that together into their own custom report for their own internal standards. And customers love the Tanium Comply module, and today we're going to show you how to love it even more. So, do you have configuration audits in your shop? And does that involve painful screenshots and spreadsheets? I've heard the stories. Well, we're going to show you today how to automate your own audits and even schedule the reports to be delivered automatically. So with me is a new guest and comply expert for our show today. Help me welcome Alysson. So please introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me today. First time here. I'm glad to be here today to share some of my experience with working with many customers throughout those 6 years, almost 6 years now that I have been here at Tanium. Prior to Tanium, I was working for a managed security service provider as a compliance and a vulnerability management analyst. And as part of my job, I was responsible to ensure that certain configurations were applied and were actually implemented. So I was responsible to ensure that all those policies or customizations that we will be talking today were actually implemented. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, and let's talk about compliance.
Yeah, so what is the problem that we're solving today exactly?
With Tanium Comply, we can ensure your configuration is actually implemented. So out of the box, you can get the CIS benchmarks, which is basically the industry standard for checking for configurations in your environment. But the good thing and the bad thing about the CIS benchmark is that it's a vendor agnostic framework for you to monitor your environment. And I say it's good and bad. It's good because it's a vendor neutral solution. But the reality is you do have a specific vendor for your AV solution. You may have a specific vendor for your DLP solution. Your policy might not align with the CIS requirements. So today we will be talking about how you can customize one of our solutions, Tanium Comply, to align with your needs, right? If you want to ensure as part of your compliance that a particular software is installed, running, and up to date, we have the ability to do that through Comply. And if your policy does not align with the requirements from CIS, you can customize that to ensure that is aligned with your policy.
That's a great overview, and it sounds like there's several things that we can customize here. Where should customers go to get started with this?
I'm glad you're asking this. So we do have a documentation in our guide website where you can see how to start with Tanium Comply. So an example here in my screen, I have what we call gaining organization effectiveness with Tanium Comply. And we have all these different levels. And these different levels, really, it's how you should start, right? If you don't have compliance starting right now, take a look at that level 1, right? Okay, what is expected for a customer that is starting to implement to level 1? So here is basically getting Comply installed and configured. And then you can start to look at as you progress, as you mature with Tanium Comply, what is the expectation, right? So for example, level 2, you have all the components of Tanium Comply actually uploaded and deployments are created to your endpoints, as an example. You have automated and manual reports. As you progress, you will see that we will have a lot of customization here, right? As you mature, you will probably start to move away from the out-of-the-box standard to your own policy. So here in level 3, we have customizing configuration compliance reports as an example, or creating some automation for those configuration reports. or sending this report out of Tanium, or even creating our own standard, right? Here at level 5, we have creating our own standard, creating our own reporting, sending the reports automatically, have some automation to deliver those reports to your management on a weekly or daily basis. So as you, if you need any guidance on how to get started with Comply, I would definitely use our help website that really has a structure, a framework for you to move from level 1 to level 5. And as you get to level 5, you will get the most value out of Comply.
Docs, right. Where else to start? That's great. Fantastic. So I'm curious, for customers who've actually put in the effort to customize this, what do you hear from them once they've got this process done? What's the difference that it makes in their environment?
It's all about checking for something that makes sense for them. So if you do have the CIS benchmark, and the CIS benchmark is requiring 14 characters for your password length, that might be not what you have implemented, not your policy. 14 characters might be a lot for your end users to remember. So you may change that and require 10 characters instead of 14, and then add some complexity. So that's actually a good example, and I see a lot of customers actually deploying this specific configuration that we are talking about, changing a value from 14 characters to 10, but then adding additional complexity to your password policy. So you have the ability to customize that. And like I said before, CIS is a vendor agnostic framework for you to check for configuration, and it doesn't check for specific vendors. So you may want to create what we call a custom check to validate that your AV, DLP, or any security agent is running according to your policies.
Well, this is a great outline for us to follow. Why don't you just let's just jump right into the console and show us where do we begin by adjusting those values to our own reporting standards?
Okay, so let's jump to the console so you can see for yourself how we can customize those configurations. Let's start about custom profiles first. So with custom profiles, we have the ability to customize a CIS benchmark and change the values like 14 to 10 for the password length, or add the checks that make sense for your organization, or take out those checks as you please. So going here to under setup compliance, under the comply module, you have the ability to go to custom profiles and then click on create. When you click on create, you will be asked to provide a name for your custom profile. So here I can company profile. You can select the standard. So from where do you want to start customizing, right? So instead of starting from scratch, from nothing, you can start from one of the CIS benchmarks. So in this example, maybe I want to start with the Windows 10 Enterprise benchmark. So I typed here Windows 10, and let's say I want to create my own profile for Windows 10. As we go through here, I will have all the different rules in the CIS benchmark. And as you probably know, these rules, they will check for different settings that are implemented in your environment. And I can start to add the things that I care. So if my policy, for example, requires a specific password configuration, I can come here and select the rule, right? The control I want to modify, and I can add to my profile. So I can do that to many rules. So I'm basically importing different rules from the out-of-the-box benchmark to my own profile. And as I add to my own profile here, I'm adding a few to my profiles related to password. And as I go here at the bottom, I can see the different rules I'm adding to my profile. And as you can see here, the level 1 rule from the CIS benchmark for Windows 10 requires 14 or more characters as the minimum password length. I have seen a lot of companies not really using 14. Maybe they require 12 or 10, and they may add some complexity or two-factor authentication on top of the password length to make it more secure. So it's really common use case to customize rules like that, where I can come here, I can select the rule I want to modify, and I can click on modify rule value. So like going back to that example where this particular company does not want to implement 14, They want to implement 12. They can change here the title of the rule. So 12 or more characters. And maybe here I can change the title, level 1. Maybe I can call company policy 01, something like that. And then at the bottom here, it's where you customize the data. So if you leave this as 14 or more characters, the password, the benchmark, this particular rule will only pass if you have 14 or more characters. But in my case, I know my policy that implements 12 or more for my password length. I can change that to 12 and then click on save. Once I click on save, now you can see here default value 14, user defined value, which is what I just did, is 12 now. And you can see the title is slightly different from what we got out of the box. So this is how you can start modifying a profile, the CIS benchmark, to your own policy.
As I'm watching, this is great that you can even rename the rule there, which makes me think probably before this step, it'd probably be a good idea to maybe create a documentation standard. Maybe it already exists for you in your own company's compliance reporting, but maybe come up with your own nomenclature or numeric system. How would you outline all those checks for your own reports, maybe?
Yeah, 100%. That's actually a lot of the customers I work with. They already have some documentation on those policies. They just need to implement technically all these different rules. So there's always a policy number that they can write here as part of their title to make it easier for them to identify where they can find the details about that policy in the documentation.
So we've got the ability then to take the existing CIS 18, customize the values, but what if there's something I need to check that's not already in the CIS 18?
That's a great question. So as you can see here in the profile, we got 524 rules that I can customize. The reality is these rules here, they are specific for, in this case, for Windows 10. They are settings that you can add to your policy or not, but they are not going to go, this checks here, they will not cover things that you may have implemented in your environment, right? So for example, you may have a vendor running as a DLP and you want to customize that and then have a check to ensure that your DLP is running. So how do we do that when you want to check for things that are not in the CIS benchmark? So it's also here under setup compliance. But instead of custom profiles, we just talked about custom profiles. We'll talk now about custom checks. With custom checks, it's a script. So you can provide Tanium a script that can pretty much check for anything you want. And as long as the code can evaluate a value and that value is expected, you can send Tanium a pass or a fail. It depends on what you're checking, right? So a lot of my customers, they have actually worked on checking a registry key and ensuring the registry key is set to a particular value. If that registry key is set to that value, you will see a pass in the scan. A pass means it worked. You have the setting implemented. Or if the register key is not there, or there is not the value that you're expecting is not deployed, then we will see something like a fail or error. So those are the things that you can define as part of your script. We actually have some documentation on how to customize this the compliance. Let me show you here in this documentation. If you scroll down here under customizing compliance in the comply documentation, there is a section for custom checks right here. And the custom checks, you can actually see what are the values. So we will support VB script and PowerShell for Windows and Bash script for on Linux machines. And here there are lots of details on how to create. We will go through that shortly. But here are the results that this custom checks they should provide to Tanium to know whether or not it worked or passed or failed. So all the scripts they have to echo to Tanium a pass or a fail, this 4 different states. So if you check in your configurations implemented, you should tell Tanium that it passed. or if the configuration not there, fail. Or if there's any error or you're unable to check, then you have those two options that we will also acknowledge and we will give you the ability to report on later.
Yeah, I'm going to guess most of the folks watching here have written a script or two in their days in IT, and we'll really just talk about a simple if then else with a pass or fail string coming out, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's really easy. Let me show you what one example looks like. It's actually, so here you can see I'm checking for my AV software is running. That's a great example of a check that you will not see in the CIS benchmark or any benchmark. So here's a good example of a script that it's checking for a particular WMI value. And if we get the value that we are expecting, we will or we will fail if it's not the value that we are expecting. Or so this is the logic. It's really if then else based on the value you're expecting and the value you found. So in this particular case, if it's not the value we are expecting, it's fail. Otherwise, it's a pass. So with 3 lines here, we are 3 lines in this script. We can check for this particular rule, which is basically checking if there is an AV installed. Let me show you another example, a little bit more complex now. So here, this is checking for a particular configuration in a browser. So in this particular example, we are checking for Google Chrome to make sure the incognito mode is disabled, right? Some customers, they don't want to allow that mode in their environment. So here's the registry keys that you can check. If the particular registry key is not set to the value we are expecting, we fail. So this is basically we are telling, we are showing, returning to comply a failure because the result we are expecting is not implemented. But if it is the value we are expecting, then it's a pass. So you can see really it's simple. It's really check and you have a value data that you are expecting. If it's what you're expecting, it's pass or a fail, and you have all the logic here and defined in the script.
Having been around Tanium for a while, we can write our own custom sensors and our own custom packages. And here we can write our own custom compliance checks. I'm guessing we just need to say out loud, you probably are thinking this, but you want to make sure these scripts are kind of short and sweet. You don't want them to be long running scripts because it's going to introduce load to your endpoint potentially. And we've got throttles in place for that, but you just want to keep these to be kind of lightweight scripts.
That's right. Yeah, you want to make sure those scripts you're not changing the configuration of the machines. You're reading the configuration, right? You're not making any changes to the endpoint. You're reading something that's local to the endpoint. You don't want to make network calls as you're writing those custom checks. Everything needs to be local, ideally running in a less than a second. So those are best practices for any scripting, and you should implement that when you are creating your own custom checks.
All right, so I've got my script written. How do I put it into comply then?
Yeah, it's fairly easy. So you can come here, custom checks, in this page under the setup compliance page, and as you click on create, you can there will be a window where you can define your custom check. For example, here Google Chrome disable incognito as an example. I can give an ID. This ID is going to help me identify this rule later. So for example, Google Chrome 01. Maybe I have 10 different rules. This is my ID for this particular rule.
And again, you would have your own company naming standards there for your own reporting rules. Yeah.
That's correct. So as a best practice, you should follow a standard. Most of my customers, they will have name of the company, and then something that identifies the policy related to this particular custom check. Then you can specify the severity for this check. This is more like for reporting later, right? So if you want to check only for custom checks that have high severity, you can use that as part of your reporting. And you can select the platform for this script. So if I created a PowerShell script here, I can select Windows. Here's where you upload the file. So this is where you upload your script, PowerShell or VB script. Rational and fixed text is basically, okay, what's the rationale behind this particular check? And fixed text is, how do you fix this issue, right? So there is a failure, you found this. Some customers, they will add those details. So operators that are using the Tanium Comply screen, they know what to do in order to fix this particular configuration. Once you have all these fields, as you can see here, some fields are mandatory, some are not. So you can create, I suggest you always fill all the fields. It's going to be easy for you to review later and understand what exactly those checks are doing. But once you're done here, you can create your custom check. And once the custom check is created, it's going to be listed here. And after you create your custom check, then you need to run assessments to check for that configuration.
So for our viewers who are watching so far, we're customizing our comply settings. We've looked at the CIS benchmarks and we determined that some of the values need to be unique for our environment. We created a custom profile. Now we've created a custom check for things that don't exist in those benchmarks. Now it's time to go run a check against our systems to combine all of that. Vanilla out of the box CIS benchmarks with our own custom values, and then our own custom checks. And so this, I'm really interested to see, how does this all come together for our own custom assessment?
Now that we have made our CIS customization, create our own profile, custom checks, like you said, we need to assess our environment. We need to check whether or not those configurations that we are expecting according to our policy are actually running and implemented in our environment. So how do we do that? Is by creating assessments. So when you go to assessments here, we can create an assessment, a compliance assessment in this case. And here you can start to check, create an configure the assessment according to your policy, right? So maybe this is like company, Windows 10 assessment. You can add labels if you want. Maybe this is like a company. You can type your own policy 01, something like that. You can add your own labels. You can select your target for this particular group. Let's say this is only checking for all Windows 10 machines. So you can select that and select the platform you want to use, in this case, Windows. You can leave all these configurations in default. You don't need to change that, but if you have a specific need to have, like, maybe using more or allow the scan to run faster than normal, you can change that. But I don't recommend changing anything here without talking to your TAN or support center. So you can leave that as default. And here is where you start to add your customization. So first of all, you need to select, if you're scanning for CIS customization, you can select here the benchmark that you have customized. In our case, we customized the Windows 10 benchmark. And here under profile, you will have multiple options. So these are the profiles that come out of the box when you get Tanium in the CIS benchmark. And if you create a custom profile, you can select that. So here's the example. I created a custom NIST in a cybersecurity framework mapping. And here you have the profile. And at the bottom here, we have the custom checks. So in this case, because it's Windows, I have the different custom checks I have created for this particular environment for Windows. I can select the checks I want to include as part of my assessment. And then it's all about scheduling. How often do you want to run this? Every day, on an interval, using what we call assessment age. So make sure all machines are covered, even if they are disconnected for a period of time. And there's a timeout configuration that you normally don't need to change. But here is where you define how often you want to check. So some companies, they will do weekly assessments, some will do monthly. I do recommend at least weekly, but there's no issues here if you want to do daily. It's really lightweight with Tanium Comply. Like we have throttles, we have controls in place to make sure those assessments are backgrounded, they are not causing issues. So if you want to do that daily and make sure your configuration is checked on a daily basis, you can do that.
I really like that assessment age. That's just wonderful. So you can just set it at 7 days. And if at any point the results fall older than 7 days, any machine in the environment is just going to run it automatically. So you know, when you look at your report, everything here is within the last 7 days. And of course, that's kind of some stale data in Tanium time, So if you want to get it daily, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this configuration, the assessment age as well. And as you said, some customers, they will have a scan. Before Comply, they were used to use their legacy tool when they were scanning on a weekly basis. And the problem with that way of scanning is that you will miss endpoints. Endpoints might not be online during that time. And if you always have that specific window and endpoints from Singapore are always offline during that time, you will never scan those endpoints. So when you use assessment age, we are actually checking when was the last scan, what is the age of the scan. If it's greater than what you specify here, we will scan the machine right away. So it's right, you're not specifying a time, but you are specifying the age. If it's older than a particular date or hours, we will scan right away. So if ensuring that you have the latest data from the endpoint is paramount for your organization, I would definitely recommend assessment age as the configuration.
So we've added our own custom checks here. We've added the CIS benchmarks. Now, I do have one clarifying question. If we scroll up to look at the benchmarks here, we have added our own custom profile with our own values that we described earlier. Will that work against all the other checks where we don't have custom values defined? I'm assuming those will just be checked by defaults, and then the custom profile will just override the check values for anything we've described?
So when you create a custom profiles, you actually define what checks you want to check. So what
Okay.
rules you want to check. So if you check all the rules, but you only customize one, we will run the customized check in all the other rules. But that's not what I normally see. Customers, as part of their custom profiles, they will select what the things they care or the things that are applicable to their environment. And when you run the assessment will only check for those things that are in the profile, not everything. So CIS benchmark 527 roles, but your profile only has 10 roles, we will check only for those 10 roles.
And the next question I have then is regarding the mapping of the results. So when we generate the report now for what's actually come out of the scan or the assessment, as I recall earlier, we were able with a custom profile to rename the label there. Maybe that's enough. But if we didn't want to go through and relabel everything, is there a way that maybe we could take those CIS benchmarks and remap them into another standard?
Yeah, that's also another common use case, right? So you have your CIS benchmark and you want to map that. Maybe that you want to map the CIS to NIST, FISMA, to another security standard. Or maybe you just want to map all the CIS rules to your security policy. So there is another option for you in terms of customizations under custom ID mappings. So here we have some examples for different frameworks, but those mappings are actually, you identify the rule you want to map against your own mapping. So that can be, for example, company and the rule that defines that particular details about that particular rule. And you just add that one rule per line in the file. I have an example here I'll show shortly. And as you define those rules, you can deploy those to your environment. So when you're running a report, you can actually see that, okay, this is the rule, and this is the mapping to FISMA, to cybersecurity framework or PCI, or your own security standard, right? It's a very common for the CIS. CIS actually provides mapping tools, mapping spreadsheet that you can see, okay, this CIS rule here maps to the access control number 9 under the FISMA framework. So you can actually see, okay, this is why I have this rule, and this is where I'm getting compliance with FISMA as an example. Or if you want a way to map all these rules to something meaningful according to your policy, you can create your own custom ID mapping to map that.
So I'm really curious to see what that file looks like. I think that's the big secret here is what do I put in a mapping file?
All right, so it's actually a customization you can see in our documentation. So if we go here under, again, customizing compliance results, this is where you find most the customization options you have in Comply. You can actually see here custom ID mappings. The file that you need to upload to Comply containing the customization, it's fairly easy for you to define. You need to identify the rule ID and then the custom ID. So for example, here we have the role ID, and you can get those details in the Tanium Comply. I'll show that shortly. And here is the custom ID, in this case, company policy 42. So sometimes you need an easy way for you to map, okay, this rule is checking for a separate partition for TMP, but how does that rule align with my policy, right? So you can use those mapping IDs to define, okay, so now I have the policy rule 42. I can go to my internal documentation and easily find, okay, why I have that particular rule. Now, where do you get the rules? Let's go back to my comply page. So if you, every time you scan the environment, you will get the data and you can review the data under findings and then compliance. And then here you have the standards that you're running in your environment. As you can see here, my CIS benchmarks. And here at the top, we have rules. When you click on rules, I'm going to show you all the different rules that are in this particular environment. And there is a column here, rule ID. So this rule ID, you will see all these different identifiers for the different rules that you can use in a custom ID mapping. So if you want to create an ID mapping, you will need this rule ID, and then, which is here in the documentation, as you can see here, rule ID. So where do you get these rule IDs? It's here. One way of
Now, I
doing it.
have to stop you. I see a button right there that says download a CSV. So can I just download the whole list? But there's 3,000 items. I don't know if I want to download all those.
So you can definitely download those this report and get access from a spreadsheet. So you can include here what columns you want, or if you want to compress the file, or just the columns that are visible to me here, or you can customize what you want here. For example, maybe I don't care about all different things. I just want the rule ID. So you have the ability to do that. You can export, and then instead of using the UI, you can use a spreadsheet. But for this particular use case, all you need to know is the rule ID for a specific check. And then you can start creating your text file. This is really a plain text file. And we will create one here as we go through. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to select the rule, going back to my file. So this is the rule ID. What you need to do after you identify the rule, you add a pipe to this is the delimiter for this configuration file. And then you add the mapping ID that you want to do. So maybe company policy 01. So all you need to do is basically identify all the different rules you want to add a mapping. So I can come here, do more, this off the same, and add my second rule ID. And then again, here I add my company policy 02 as an example. So all you need to do now is to save this file and upload to this screen here that we were before. So I can come here, custom ID mapping, and then I click on import. Now we know how to create a custom ID mapping. Now let me show you what a NIST ID mapping looks like. So I'm going to download, I'm going to export this. And as I export, we can actually open this one in this example, where we will be able to, I'm going to show you what one, it's a little bit more complex than what I showed you before because we only had two rules. So let me just go here and show you. Yeah, so here you can see there's a bunch of rules here. So this rule, the first rule, map, and this is the custom ID, SC7. SC7 here again, SC7. So in this case, we are mapping the CIS benchmark rule ID to a control under the FISMA framework or the NIST 853. So if you are to, okay, I have this rule, CIS rule, checking for file, but how does it map to the requirements from NIST, defining the NIST publication 853? Okay, this is the map. This is where you need to go to understand how this rule fits into NIST 853. So this particular case, we have all these different rules. We do have some rules that you can ask support center or your team that they can provide, and then you can customize this. But here you can see the different rules and how they map and the different custom IDs that are mapped to this particular rule in this case.
Well, this is super helpful. So now I'm thinking the next step is what does the report look like once we've put all this together?
All right, so there are different ways for you to consume this data. One is here under findings, so using the UI. So here I can see my rules and the status of the rules. So here, for example, I have my custom check. This is a custom check, as you can see. If I scroll here to the right, I can see, okay, all my endpoints passed or fail. I can download this as a CSV from here. It's pretty easy, as you can add here a name, compress or not the file, get all the data. You can filter this data. Maybe I don't want to, I just want to look at things that failed, right? Or a particular profile. So in this case, let's say I just want to see things that fail. The pass, I don't really care because it's already passed. So here now I can see the fail. I can see how many endpoints fail for this particular check. I can do a drill down. Now I get the different endpoints that fail, 5 different endpoints. So findings is a way for you to consume and review the data directly from the console. We also have questions that you can use. So for example, here I have a question for compliant to get the comply results, the compliance results. So I can ask a question. Here's one example: get compliant results. You can add the hash of the assessment that you added all those customizations, and then you ask the question here, and you can start to see, for example, the rule ID, the status, and here the custom ID we were talking about, right? So how this custom ID this rule is mapped to a particular custom ID, and this is the custom ID. I can filter this data out based on a particular value, for example. Yeah, so now I'm filtering on a particular custom ID I added to this particular rule or rules in this case. And I can see all the ones that have an access control number 2, all the benchmark rules related to access control number 2 under the NIST framework 853 and their status. So you can build some report here. You can save this as a question. But what I see most of our customers doing is exporting this data. So you can export this data through Tanium Connect, or you can create a dashboard, and we can talk more about that.
So we have another video back in the playlist. If you look for the Tanium Connect episode, it'll show you it's really simple to create a source and a destination. So your source there is going to be Tanium Comply, findings there to choose for your comply source, and then you just pick your destination wherever you want to send it, which it could include an email address.
Yeah. Let's go over that real quick. So you can come here to Tanium Connect, create connection, and under source, you can select comply. You will use the comply findings. Under the findings, you can select compliance in this particular case. If you have created a report for like your Windows 10 benchmark with all your customizations, you can select that report. And here you can define your destination. Maybe you want to send this to your email, like Ashley said. So here at the bottom, you have the configuration, how often you want to send this data out. So maybe on a schedule basis, on every day, on a particular time. You can select customize the data. So this is another use case I've seen customers doing a lot, customizing the data that goes out with this particular report. So maybe they want to get, in addition to all this data, so you can see here what's by default, what's going to come with this particular export. So you get the rule ID, standard, all the different things here. Maybe you want to include the fixed text as part of this report, right? Especially if you're sending this to the remediation team. If you want to automate that and send a report directly to the remediation team, including the fixed text, the instructions to remediate the configuration issue that we found in this report is going to be useful, right? So you have all the different fields here that you can include as part of your report. And at the bottom, like I mentioned before, you can schedule this, how often you want to send this out.
This is fantastic, Alysson. Thank you so much for walking us through here. Because, I've been around Tanium a while, and this is the first time I've ever had a SME walk me all the way start to finish with custom compliance reports after all these years. So thank you for this. And I know our customers and partners are really going to enjoy this content as well. We're about out of time. Anything else as we wrap up here?
I think the only content we didn't cover today is creating our own dashboards in Tanium. So you can send this data out. Some customers, they prefer to just go to the console and consume the data there. So if that's your case, we have the reporting solution, which gives you the ability to create your own dashboards or your reports. And it's fairly easy for you to create the dashboards, right? So you can come here and, for example, select the data you want. So maybe I want the compliance. When you type compliance here, it's going to give you some options. And here I can select what I want to add to my report. So here I'm adding a lot of different things. So you can see here the rule ID, You can add the status of the rule. So if there was an exception or not for that rule, or if there was a pass or not for that rule. So you can create your own dashboards based on that. So here you create the report. Once you have a report, you can create a dashboard. So here, for example, I think we have a custom check dashboard. And here is, we are checking for AV software enable, and over time, what is my environment looking like? So over time, I have 5 machines last week, and I still have 5 machines now. So there was no changes, and that's what you want to see. Everything going continue to be a pass. But if there was a change over time, you can see here in this dashboard what your environment is looking like over time.
Yeah, and that's very versatile because you could take that same data source and just pull different columns out of it and graph them different ways. And really, and then you have the benefits here within the reporting of sending all those graphical, really pretty looking HTML reports with all the nice clickable mouse over things. Send those in email as well. Just a really great solution there.
Yeah, absolutely. So here you can, some of the out of the box dashboards that we have that you can use. So you can see here, there's a lot of options on how you can configure your environment. So here is looking for risk score, how many endpoints with the highest risk score, but it gives you an idea of what kind of graphic representation you can add for all the compliance issues you have in your environment.
Well, Alysson, thank you so much for this tour of customizing Tanium Comply today. Wow. And I know my customer is going to be excited to watch this, and I hope you are too, as you've been watching along today. And as always, all those links that we referenced in the documentation today, find those all in the show notes below here on the YouTube video description. And after you've gone through the video, after you've read through the docs, if you still have questions, reach out to whoever helps you at Tanium. We would love to help you if you have any other questions. You can also go to help.tanium.com, where we find a lot of answers and our discussion boards, and post questions for other customers to answer there how they've done it. And so that all those resources are available to you today. So thank you for tuning in, and until next time, go Tanium.